win streak, it didn't continue, but a lot to talk about. We're going to start, though, Buster, with the 2025 Little League Baseball World Series. Now, it began Wednesday. All games are going to be from Williamsport, Pennsylvania, from August 13th to 24th, and this is something that I know we were so excited for. There's a team from Bonnie Lake, which is really, really cool. Just help set the scene for us a little bit with just how excited you are for the stretch of play here over the next week.
Yeah, it's a really cool event. The Little League Classic. I don't do the Little League coverage, the coverage of the Little League World Series, but I've been doing the coverage for the Little League Classic with the two major league teams dropping in for the last 7 years. And Stacy, there's no question. Just knowing players that haven't covered baseball for a long time, I'm sure that when the players see this on their schedule, they're like, "Oh man." So we gotta in the middle of the dog days of August, we gotta get on a plane and go to the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania. And then when they arrive, it is a blast, and they have absolute fun. The other day I was talking with Francisco Lindor, the Met shortstop, who's going to be there this weekend, and he talked about how when you talk to kids, you're reminded why you fell in love with baseball in the first place. And so what happens is that the Mets and the Mariners will fly in to the little airfield that they have there in Williamsport, and then they get put on a bus, the major leaguers, with little leaguers. And they pretty much spend the next 4 or 5 hours with little leaguers. And, and a lot of these little leaguers, some of them will be shy, but a lot of them won't be. And they'll be asking Cal Raleigh, "Hey, what do you think of your nickname? What does your mom think of your nickname?" And Lindor was saying that the players will propose trades of stuff, and they'll look at him and say, "I'll trade you my glove for your glove. Does that sound like a good swap?
Aww.
And can I have your wristbands? Can I?" And it is just so joyful. And you'll see players this weekend, probably some of the Mariners jumping on that cardboard and going down that side hill, sliding down the side hill to the Little League complex. And then when the actual game starts, and Major League Baseball really has done a good job of upgrading the condition of Bowman Field there in Williamsport. Once the game starts, it's such a unique atmosphere because we're all used to, 3 decked stadiums that have a particular sound, a mix of adults and some kids when something happens in the game. And I'm telling you, just sitting there, the first time somebody hits the ball in the air, it is this sound of 10 to 12-year-olds going, "Ooh," when the ball goes up in the air. It's really fun. And, these kids get to be, a couple feet away from Julio Rodriguez and from Cal Raleigh and from Louis Castillo and from Juan Soto and Lindor. I mean, it really is a special event.
Buster, you talk about just kind of the wholesomeness of this event, but it's also a game that matters a lot to both of these teams in the standings because the Mariners trying to chase down the Astros in the West and also hold their lead in the AL wildcard. The Mets also trying to avoid going into a complete free fall here. This Mariners team, what have you made of them over the last couple of weeks since the trade deadline, especially that 8-game win streak in the middle of all that?
So just real quick about the Mets, and you're right about the pennant race. I bet you that the Mets players are popping champagne bottles this weekend that they have this game in Williamsport because in New York, it's so negative right now. Excuse me, I got a bit of a cold. It's so negative in New York, and it's not to say that the Mets fans are doing anything wrong or different, but it's just an intense reaction when a team is in free fall the way the Mets are. So to get out and to go to Williamsport and having a bunch of kids oohing, awing when you hit a pop fly, it'll be a nice respite for them. Now, with the Mariners, it's like they have pixie dust sprinkled on them. It really does feel that way since they made that first trade for Josh Naylor, since not only Jerry DiPoto, but ownership signaling that they were kind of all in on this run down the stretch by what they gave up at the trade deadline. It's a dramatic shift, and I think on paper, it's the best Mariners lineup, which has always been the question. They usually have good pitching, but it's the best Mariners lineup since 2001, which is saying something. Yeah. And especially that this is happening, they're with this surge, is happening in a year in which the American League is so stinking wide open. and there are no dominant teams. You know, the Astros, who I have a ton of respect for because they've been playing with a bunch of injuries, you know, they still have to overcome the loss of Josh Hader now. And, you know, we'll see if Yordan Alvarez gives them anything. The Tigers have been slumping of late, as you know. I think Toronto's a good team. They put the ball in play, but they're not a dominant team. I mean, it is wide open for the Mariners to make their first run of the World Series.
Hey, Buster, first of all, we listen to Baseball Tonight all the time. So obviously we're used to just hearing your coverage of these teams. And I will say it's always fun to hear, you know, whether it's you guys, maybe it's SportsCenter, whatever, when the Mariners become a national story. And that's on the Mariners' part. It's not like a lack of media attention. It's you don't make the playoffs for, 21 years and then make it and don't get back. You're not going to get a ton of coverage. But you're right. It feels like within that sprinkling of pixie dust, there's just so many fun stories. There's just, Cal Raleigh inching past Rooker in the home run derby to then go on and win it all in a season that we've never seen before from a catcher. It's just, it feels storybook, and it's hard not to feel like something cool is destined to happen with this team, or really cool could happen with this team. Right.
The Hall of Fame stuff.
It's
the timing of it.
It's like you wrote up a story for the Mariners season and you're watching it happen. So how do they actually get there? I mean, you watch a lot of these teams. Every single year you see teams that end up making it. You can recognize the formula for what kind of team ends up going pretty far. What needs to happen for Seattle?
So it's interesting. A few years ago, when they were kind of pushing up against the glass ceiling for them, which is the Houston Astros, I remember talking to Jerry about it, DePoto, and he mentioned that he thought that the young players on the team at that time had to learn how to beat the Astros in big games. That was the next part of the learning curve. I think they're past that. I think it comes down to from this, especially with the rotation becoming intact next week with the return of Bryce Miller. It feels like they're the most talented team right now. Like, they have a deep lineup. There's a lot to love about this team. Robles coming back, that's going to be a help. It'll give more options for Dan Wilson. And that's why, when you look at a team like the Cincinnati Reds, for example, you have to sort of envision this, or the Diamondbacks in the World Series 2 years ago, or Texas, this sort of magical road that they go down to make it. I don't think the Mariners need that. I think they're the best team on paper. Like, they are a loaded team compared to where some of the other American League teams are. So you hope, obviously, for good health. You hope that, whatever, and I'm looking forward to seeing Cal this weekend and asking about his recent hitting. I'm not surprised that he's gone into a slump because he's, playing every day and catching, and it's a hard position to play. But I do think, assuming that he comes back and finishes better than what he's been over the last month, they're the team to beat to me in the American League, which sounds kind of nuts because they're sitting in second place as we speak.
Buster, a big reason for the Mariners' surge has been the play of Julio Rodriguez, especially since the All-Star break. Choosing to sit out the All-Star break, which everybody's kind of scratching their head about, but turns out it was really beneficial for him because he has been just hitting like gangbusters since then. What have you made of his second half of the season and how it's really been a big spark to this Mariners offense?
We kind of know who he is right now, right? So next April, if he's batting 190 early in the year, I think we go, well, it's coming eventually. He's a great player. And I had a conversation in the offseason that really opened my eyes quite a bit with Mark Teixeira, a longtime big leaguer, who was historically a slow starter. And I asked him about Julio and about his own tendency to be a slow starter. He said, you know what I found? He said, there are some hitters, who wake up on a given day, and Ichiro is probably one of these people. You could probably wake him up at age 78 and, send him up as a pinch hitter. He's going to hit a line drive to left field. Some people are built that way. And Teixeira said, I had to relearn how to hit every year. And I kind of wonder if Julio is just going to be one of those players, and that's okay. Every player goes through their different process. But look, when Julio is at his best, and that has been typically in the second half of the years, he is an impact player. And here's the thing. What's great for him and for Cal is that if they don't get it done on a given day, and it felt like a couple of years ago when the Mariners were in the playoffs, that if Julio didn't get it done, they were kind of, out of luck. now it feels like there are a lot of guys who can, Josh Naylor is a great clutch hitter. He's a great proven hitter. He can, carry the load for a week, for a stretch of games. Suarez obviously is capable of doing that. It's a much deeper lineup than we've seen from the Mariners in a long time.
Hey, kind of a twofold question here. It's on the one half about the MVP race, but it's mostly just about Cal and historically kind of putting into context what he's doing. Buster, I think that people who love and cover baseball really love history, and someone doesn't have to have the most obscene numbers you've ever seen for you to look at it and go, wow, I'm seeing something I might never see again, or that I've certainly never seen before, and I think that's what we're seeing with Cal. So, two-part question here. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the double-barrel question, but I'm really curious to know, over the course of the season, the conversations you've had with people around baseball, because we hear all the time from people here in Seattle about Cal, but what's kind of been the sentiment around baseball and the conversations you've had outside of Seattle about Cal? And secondly, does that historic context of what he's doing become a factor in an MVP race?
So, first and foremost, people ask me all the time which team I root for. And I always say, I don't root for anybody. What I do hope for are good stories and for good stuff to happen to good people. And Cal is kind of both, right? I don't really know him. We're not going to pretend like we're, like I know him really well, but everybody you talk to talks about what a good person he is. And how grounded he is. I enjoyed my interplay with him. I talked to the guys at the Home Run Derby. They talked about how gracious he was. You do wonder if, a lot of that, getting the media attention kind of wears him out. Teams are aware of that. But either way, it's been a phenomenal season for him. And, yeah, his numbers have come back. There's no question at the All-Star break, he was having the greatest season ever for any catcher in the history of baseball statistically. Now, because the numbers have come back, I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case, but it is so rare to see a dominant offensive performance from a dominant defensive catcher. Mike Piazza was a marvelous hitter. He was a number 3 hitter for the New York Mets. He made the Hall of Fame, but he was never regarded as a high-end defensive catcher. Johnny Bench was. The Johnny Bench, for me, is kind of the standard in baseball history. And what Cal Raleigh's doing this year is up there with what Johnny Bench did, in his best years in the early 70s with the Big Red Machine. So it's neat to see him having that. And again, just because I've always heard what a great guy is, you're happy that he's having that moment.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Buster, the Mariners pitching staff has obviously, it's been led by Brian Wu this season, but obviously Logan Gilbert has been fantastic in the past, and this year, bouncing back from that injury, his strikeouts are way up. Luis Castillo has been solid as ever. George Kirby's starting to look like himself again. You mentioned the looming return of Bryce Miller. They're going to be playing some big games here down the stretch, games that are going to matter a lot in the standings. If you had to give the ball to any one of these guys in a win-or-go-home scenario, who would you want out on the mound to give you at least a good 6 or 7 in that game?
See, I was going to deflect that question and say, boy, Dan Wilson has some really tough choices coming up in the postseason, and he does, right? Where there's no question, like Brian Wu, I think that based on what we've seen this year, that's typically how, you would say he would be the guy. But do you go against a Logan Gilbert with his, his career basically of dominance? Do you go against a Luis Castillo with his experience that he has? Look, when I covered those Yankee teams in the late 90s, you had Roger Clemens, you had Andy Pettitte, and you had David Cohn, Joe Torre, David Wells. Joe Torre had to navigate those choices because sometimes it's not only about who's the best pitcher, it's also kind of a political thing in the clubhouse. And so Andy Pettitte at times was the most effective pitcher, but he also understood what it meant for someone like Roger to get the ball in game 1, and so he would go with that. And I am really curious to see what Dan chooses. I'm going to be the nerd who says I'm going to go on the numbers, and I would pick Brian Wu right now, but every one of those guys can make a great case, and it's certainly if you're in the Mariners position, you love the fact that a couple of those guys are going to go in the bullpen once you're in the playoffs.
Yep. Mariners and Mets facing off at Bowman Field in Williamsport on August 17th. You can catch the broadcast on ESPN Sunday Night Baseball, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. He is ESPN's Buster Olney. Thanks, Buster.
Thanks, Buster.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Have a good one.